Hospitals are meant to heal, to provide comfort in times of illness. But what happens when the very place designed to save lives becomes a source of terror? For years, I worked the night shift, moving through the sterile hallways, hearing whispers and strange sounds that I couldn't explain. But nothing prepared me for the things I saw, the things I experienced. 3 encounters, each more terrifying than the last, that would make anyone question the true nature of a place that's supposed to heal. And they all began on seemingly quiet nights like any other. It was 2 a.m. The hospital was darker than usual, like the lights had been dimmed without anyone noticing. I've worked nights before, but never quite like this. The hallways stretched out before me, too long, too empty. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled the air, and the faint flicker of fluorescent lights above did nothing to ease the tension creeping up my spine. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing far louder than they should, the sound bouncing off the walls like a warning. I glanced at the rooms as I passed, seeing only the faint glow of monitors and the occasional patient lying motionless, their bodies covered in thin sheets. The machines hummed in the background, but the quiet between those sounds was what got to me. I could feel it, pressing on my chest. Like something dark was just beyond the corner, just out of sight, waiting for me to come closer. I had been a nurse for years, worked through all sorts of things. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold that night. The hospital had always felt like home to me. But that night, it felt like a trap. It started with small things that could be explained away, or so I thought. I noticed the lights flickering above me, almost imperceptibly. Just a brief flash here and there. Old wiring, I told myself. I thought nothing of it, but then it happened again. The sound of footsteps. Soft, deliberate, but there was no one in sight. I looked down the hallway, expecting to see someone, but the corridor was empty. Still, the footsteps continued, echoing just behind me. They weren't my own. They weren't anyone's I knew. I stopped, but the footsteps didn't. It was as if the very hallway was walking with me, and the emptiness it held felt too alive. I couldn't shake it off, though. Maybe I was just tired, I thought. Maybe I was hearing things. But then, I passed room 307. That room. I never thought much about it before, but that night, something about it pulled me in. As I passed the door, I heard it. Whispers. Low, urgent voices. At first, I thought it was the wind or the building settling, but no. It was voices. I stopped in my tracks and listened. There was no one in that room, I knew it. But the voices, they kept whispering, like they were trying to tell me something. I turned the corner quickly, hoping to leave it behind, but the whispers followed me. They never stopped. I was getting paranoid. I had to be. I was tired, stressed, running on fumes. But even then, I knew what I heard. I knew it wasn't normal. And yet, I still couldn't make sense of it. I decided to check on the storage room. I needed something to occupy my mind. But as I opened the door, I froze. There, standing in front of the window, was a figure. A person, or what I thought was a person. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. The figure stood still, staring out into the dark. I couldn't see their face, only their back. My heart pounded as I stepped closer. My hand was almost on the doorframe when I blinked. And they were gone. Vanished. No sound, no movement, nothing. I stood there, staring at the empty room, my heart racing. Was I imagining it? Was I just too tired? No, it couldn't have been a trick of the mind. Something was here with me, and it wasn't human. The strange occurrences didn't stop. The whispers, the footsteps. They followed me wherever I went. I began to feel like I was being hunted. It wasn't just my imagination anymore. There was something in the hospital, something darker than I could have ever prepared for. I had to know what was going on. I went to room 307, the source of the whispers. I needed to check on a patient, but when I opened the door, the room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, the sheets smooth, like nothing had ever been disturbed. But the window was wide open, and the wind howled through, chilling the air around me. I didn't know it at the time, but that room had a history. A dark one. I found out later that room 307 had once been occupied by a woman who died under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was natural causes. Others said her death was no accident. Her spirit was said to haunt the halls, roaming the hospital at night, waiting for something or someone. It was late. The ER was quiet, empty, except for the machines and me. Then I heard it, breathing. Slow, steady, but unmistakably close. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. No one was there. But the breathing, so close, it felt like it was coming from inside my chest. I backed away, but then the lights went out. Complete darkness. My fingers trembled as I reached for the light switch, but before I could, I heard it, the sound of footsteps, getting closer. Closer. Each step heavier than the last. And then, I felt it. Cold hands on my shoulders. Ice cold. I screamed, but nothing came out. I spun around, but the room was empty. The breathing stopped. The footsteps faded away. But I was no longer alone. Something had been with me, and I wasn't sure I'd ever escape. I never went back to that hospital after that night. I couldn't. What happened to me was beyond anything I could explain, beyond anything I could rationalize. I've heard the stories about hospitals being haunted, about spirits wandering the halls, waiting for their time. But I never believed it, until I felt it, until I saw it. But here's the thing, some hospitals aren't just places for healing. Some are places where the dead are waiting. And I'm not sure which one I walked into that night. Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Have you ever been somewhere that felt wrong? Let me know in the comments below. It was just another night shift at the hospital. The halls were quiet, as usual, stretching out in front of me, empty and cold. The flicker of fluorescent lights above was almost rhythmic, a constant reminder that the night was dragging on. There was a sense of calm in the air, but it was too still, too quiet. The kind of silence that settles deep, suffocating the mind. I moved through the corridors, checking rooms and monitoring patients, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the sterile, white walls. But on this night, something felt different. The air was thick, almost metallic. Maybe it was the exhaustion creeping in from the long hours, or maybe it was something else. I tried to shake off the unease that gnawed at me, but the longer I stayed, the stronger the feeling grew. Something was watching. Or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. I brushed it off at first, just a flicker of the lights, a shadow moving at the edge of my vision. Nothing too unusual, I told myself. But then it started to get worse. I felt a chill on the back of my neck, as though someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my spine. I turned quickly, but no one was there. I told myself it was the tiredness, nothing more. But the cold breath kept following me, a presence that never left. It wasn't long before I started hearing things. Soft whispers calling my name. Jessica, Jessica. The voice was faint, like it was coming from behind me. I stopped and looked around, but the hallway was empty. Just the hum of the lights and the distant beeping of machines. Nothing. But still, the whispers kept coming, each one growing louder, more urgent. Jessica. They called again, from the empty halls, from rooms that were supposed to be empty. I couldn't make sense of it. Was I losing my mind? Or was something else going on? The strange sounds didn't stop. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing through the hallway. I checked the corners, but there was no one there. No one in the rooms, no one in the halls. Just the oppressive silence of the hospital at night. It all came to a head when I walked past room 17. I knew that room well. It was always locked, never used. No patients, no staff. But tonight, the door was slightly ajar. I stopped, my heart suddenly racing. The whispers were louder now, clearer, coming from inside the room. They weren't just voices anymore. They were a chorus, a cacophony, all of them calling my name at once. Jessica, Jessica. I had to go in. I pushed the door open with trembling hands, my breath caught in my throat. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, as it always was. The air felt cold, colder than it should have been. But as I turned to leave, I felt it again, the sense that I wasn't alone. I looked into the mirror on the wall, and there she was. She was standing behind me, hovering just off the ground, her eyes hollow and dark. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. She was there, but not there. She wasn't standing, she was floating, waiting. I turned to face her, but when I did, she was gone. Just like that, vanished. I didn't wait to see if she'd come back. I ran. My heart was pounding in my chest as I bolted down the hall, not daring to look back. The door to room 17 slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang, and I couldn't get it open. Not until hours later, when the morning shift came on. I still don't know what happened that night. Was it just my tired mind playing tricks on me? Or was something truly dark hiding in the shadows of that hospital, something that didn't want me to leave? What do you think? Have you ever felt something you couldn't explain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You'd think hospitals are places of healing, right? That's what I always believed. I worked those night shifts, thinking I was just doing my job, helping people, taking care of the sick. But one night, something happened that shook me to my core. Something I still can't explain, something that I'm still trying to understand. It wasn't supposed to be any different from the usual shift. But as the night wore on, I realized this wasn't a regular hospital. This place had its own secrets. And those secrets, they were about to come for me. It was just past midnight when I began my shift. The hospital, usually so alive with activity, was eerily quiet. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above me, their soft buzzing reverberating through the empty halls. The walls, white and sterile, seemed to stretch on forever. But it wasn't the sight that unsettled me, it was the silence. It was thick, unnatural, like the kind of silence you only hear in places that hold secrets. Every footstep echoed loudly, as if the hospital itself was swallowing up any trace of sound. The air was stale, almost damp, despite the fact that the ventilation system was working just fine. The usual comforting scent of antiseptic seemed to have disappeared, replaced by something off. Something that I couldn't quite name. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the exhaustion, but it felt like the walls themselves were closing in on me. I glanced at the clock, 2 a.m. This was when the shifts were the hardest, when the exhaustion and monotony made the mind play tricks. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was a strange, subtle tension in the air, as if the hospital were holding its breath, waiting for something. The sound of my own footsteps was the only thing I could hear as I walked down the long, narrow hallway, but it felt like someone else was walking right beside me. I reached the nurse's station, but no one was there. The chairs were empty, the desks clear. It was just me and the silence. That's when it hit me, the uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. My spine tingled, and I couldn't shake the sensation that there was someone else in the hospital with me, watching me from just out of sight. The cold air around me grew colder. The walls, once comforting and familiar, now seemed to press closer, as if they were closing in, and the quiet, that damn silence, it was suffocating. I had worked the night shift at St. Michael's Hospital for just over a year. Day shifts were easy, but night shifts? Well, they were something else. There was a rhythm to it, the occasional beeping of machines, the faint murmur of voices from far away, the shuffle of nurses' shoes on the tiles. It wasn't a glamorous job by any means, but it was my job. I'd grown used to the late hours and the endless stretch of empty hallways. The nights blended together, one indistinguishable from the next. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect something out of the ordinary. You'd think it would be filled with ghosts or spirits, given its age and the countless patients who'd passed through its doors over the years. But I didn't believe any of that. I mean, come on, ghosts? It's a hospital, not some haunted mansion. Sure, there were stories, whispers among the night nurses about strange occurrences, flickering lights, cold spots, patients claiming to see things in the middle of the night. But those were just stories, right? People see what they want to see when they're sick, tired, or scared. At least that's what I told myself. I'd heard about it all. The old woman who swore she saw a figure standing at the foot of her bed, the nurse who quit after hearing her name whispered in an empty hallway, and the doctor who claimed he saw shadows moving along the walls. But I always laughed it off. I had worked night shifts before. Plenty of them. There's a certain rhythm to the quiet, the kind of stillness you come to accept. At first, the silence was unsettling, but after a while, it became comforting. It's funny how you can get used to something that seems so unnatural at first. And me, I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or hauntings. Rational thinking, that's what keeps me grounded. If something weird happens, there's always a logical explanation. Flickering lights, wires, shadows on the wall, the angle of the light, strange noises, the building settling. I had never been one to get caught up in those superstitions. That's why when the first weird thing happened that night, I shrugged it off. I had heard it, 2 footsteps, light taps on the floor, like someone was walking behind me. But I didn't even flinch. I kept walking. This wasn't my first late night shift. I'd heard stories before, but I had never seen anything to back them up. I was always the skeptic, the practical one. After all, there was a reason people got so scared of hospitals at night. Most of them were half asleep, and their minds just wandered. It wasn't long before I started to notice something odd, something small at first, easy to dismiss, easy to laugh off. I was walking down the corridor toward the supply room, my usual route, when I saw it. The lights, which had been steady for hours, flickered once, then twice. I paused, staring up at the ceiling, where the harsh fluorescent bulbs buzzed faintly. It wasn't the first time the lights had done that. Probably just an electrical issue, I thought. Nothing more. But then, the air changed. There was a slight shift, a drop in temperature, almost imperceptible at first, like the room had suddenly become too cold. My breath, which I hadn't even noticed before, came out in little clouds, even though I was wearing my usual hospital scrubs, light and breathable. I shook it off. Hospitals are drafty, especially at night. Nothing unusual about that. Nothing unusual at all. I kept walking. I hadn't made it more than a few steps before I heard it. A faint sound, a tap tap tap, echoing from behind me. My steps faltered, and for just a second I froze. The sound came from somewhere down the hall, behind me, almost too soft to hear but unmistakable in the quiet of the night. A series of rhythmic footsteps. My first instinct was to turn around and check, but I didn't. I didn't want to be that person, the one who jumps at shadows. But there was something about it, something that made my heart race. I pushed myself to keep moving. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but the footsteps didn't stop. They followed me, growing louder, as though they were getting closer with each step I took. I turned around, expecting to see one of the nurses or perhaps a colleague. But the hallway behind me was empty, completely empty. The lights were dim, casting long, ghostly shadows on the walls, but no one was there. I looked down the length of the corridor, silent, still. The footsteps stopped at the same time I did. But that wasn't the only thing that unsettled me. No. What made my stomach twist was the sudden awareness, the unnerving feeling that I wasn't alone in that hallway. Something or someone was there. I could feel it, as though eyes were boring into my back, watching, waiting. I forced myself to continue, my shoes clicking against the hard tile, the sound almost deafening in the silence. I told myself I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me. That's all. The hospital's old. It makes noises. But then it happened again. The sound, the same soft, deliberate footsteps, so close now that they seemed to echo in my ears. My skin prickled. I stopped again. I turned around quickly, expecting nothing. But this time, there was something different. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure, a shadow. It moved just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, slipping in and out of view. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't make out any details, no face, no form, just something dark. A fleeting presence, like a trick of the light. But that wasn't possible, was it? Hospitals didn't have ghosts. I took another step, my hand reaching for the door handle, but something stopped me. A chill ran down my spine as a cold draft suddenly swept past me. And then the unmistakable sound, louder this time, almost like a breath just behind me. I whipped around, my eyes wide, heart hammering against my ribs. But again, nothing. No one. Just the long, empty hallway stretching before me, as silent as ever. I thought the strange occurrences were just a fluke, a trick of the mind. But as the night wore on, the feeling in the hospital grew heavier, more oppressive. The air became thick, like something was pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. I had seen the shadow, heard the footsteps. But now things were escalating in a way I couldn't ignore. I had just finished checking on a patient in the ICU, and as I stepped back into the hallway, I felt it again, the chill. But this time it was worse. It wasn't just a draft, it wasn't just a fleeting sensation. The cold settled in around me like a thick fog, and it stayed. I could feel my breath hitching in the frigid air, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself, but it did nothing to warm me. It was as if the hospital itself was getting colder. That's when I heard the whispers. At first, they were soft, barely audible, like the faint rustling of paper or wind passing through the vents. But then they grew louder. No, not just louder, clearer. Words. Words I couldn't quite understand, but they were coming from somewhere. I couldn't pinpoint where. They were echoing off the walls, swirling around me, getting closer, as if someone was speaking right next to me. I froze. I turned toward the direction of the sound, but there was no one. The hallway was empty again. My heart was racing now, the beats so loud in my ears, I thought they might drown out the whispers. My mind was screaming at me to rationalize it, to tell myself it was the wind, the old pipes, the hum of the ventilation. But the whispers didn't stop. They kept coming, circling me. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I was sure the whispers were coming from the shadows themselves, creeping up on me, calling me. And then suddenly everything stopped. The air went still. The whispers, the flickering lights, the cold, all of it just stopped. For a moment, the silence was so complete, so absolute, that I thought maybe I had imagined it all. But I didn't have long to feel relieved. It happened again. This time, it was more than just whispers. I heard a scraping sound, a low, dragging noise that seemed to come from behind me, along the floor. I spun around, expecting to find something, anything, but again there was nothing. But then I saw it. A shadow, long and thin, moved across the wall. It didn't make sense. There was no source. The lights above flickered, casting uneven pools of light and shadow across the hallway. And that shadow, it didn't belong. It moved against the grain of the light, stretching in unnatural directions, as if it was trying to avoid the illumination. It was almost alive. I took a step back, my pulse racing, but my feet were rooted to the ground. The shadow seemed to grow longer, twisting like a snake, curling up toward the ceiling, then slithering down the wall to the floor, stopping just a few feet away from me. I felt the breath catch in my throat, a cold sweat forming on my forehead. My legs felt weak. My mind screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed, unable to move. That's when I felt it, the sensation at the back of my neck. A cold breath, icy freezing, just inches from my skin. I couldn't move. I didn't want to turn around, but something made me do it. I slowly turned my head, and when I did, nothing. Nothing at all. The hallway was empty once again, but I knew it wasn't over. It was as if the very walls of the hospital were alive, watching me, waiting for something. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, constricted. The air around me felt heavier, like it was pressing against my chest. And the whispers started again, louder now, sharper, more insistent. I stumbled backward, my hands reaching out to steady myself against the wall. But the wall didn't feel right. It was warm, warmer than it should have been. And the more I touched it, the warmer it became, until it was like the hospital itself was burning from the inside out. The whispers, they were no longer whispers. They were voices now, so clear, so distinct. "Get out," one voice said. "Leave now," said another. And then I heard a laugh, soft, mocking, like it came from someone who knew more than I did. A voice that I recognized, but couldn't place. It was a voice I had heard before, somewhere in the hospital, but it wasn't anyone I could see. Panic set in. My hands shook as I pulled away from the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had to leave. I had to get out, but as I turned toward the exit, I froze. The hallway was longer than it had been before. The doors, there were more of them now. Doors that I hadn't seen before, doors that didn't lead anywhere I recognized. I turned back, but the corridor was still the same. It had grown, expanded, like the hospital itself was shifting around me. The shadows, they were moving now, crawling up the walls, reaching out toward me, and then I heard it again, the footsteps. Louder this time, but this time, they were behind me. I wasn't alone anymore. The cold that had gripped me only intensified as I took one slow, hesitant step after another down the hallway. My mind was in a frenzy, scrambling for explanations, anything that could make sense of the terror I was experiencing. But there was nothing. The whispers had stopped for the moment, but the silence, this unnatural, suffocating silence, had become its own form of torment. The shadows continued to stretch along the walls, as if they were alive, stretching toward me, and I couldn't escape them. I kept walking, despite the feeling that my body was moving on its own, like I was no longer in control. The footsteps followed me again. They echoed through the hallway, louder and louder, too loud to ignore. It was like someone was right behind me, just out of view, matching my pace. I knew I had to turn around. I knew I had to face whatever this was, whatever was hunting me. I couldn't stop. My legs felt like lead, my feet too heavy to lift. But then I did it. I spun around, expecting to face the thing that had been shadowing me for what felt like an eternity. And that's when it happened. In front of me, just beyond the reach of the flickering light, was a door. I don't know why I hadn't noticed it before, but there it was, standing ajar. There was a dim light spilling out from the crack, casting strange shapes across the floor. I couldn't explain it, but my feet carried me toward the door, almost as though they were being guided by something else. Something that wasn't me. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. It felt warm, unnaturally warm. The metal almost burned my skin. I hesitated, my breath shallow, but then something inside me compelled me to turn it. The door creaked open, the sound deafening in the silence. I stepped through the threshold. The room was dark, save for that single light hanging from the ceiling. The walls were covered in peeling, yellowed paint, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been opened in years. I stepped further into the room, feeling a heaviness in my chest, the kind you get when you know something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. That's when I saw it. At the far side of the room was a bed. But it wasn't just any bed. The sheets were tangled, as if someone had been thrashing in them. But that wasn't what stopped me. What stopped me was the figure lying in the bed. It wasn't a patient. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was a woman, her face half hidden beneath tangled, dirty hair, her eyes closed in a way that made her appear to be sleeping. But her stillness wasn't peaceful. It was wrong. So wrong. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart began to race. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Then her eyes opened. The instant they did, I felt it. A coldness that shot through me, a wave of pure, raw terror. Her gaze was empty, void of life, void of humanity. It was as if she wasn't even seeing me, but rather through me, into something I couldn't understand. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears, my vision starting to blur. The room seemed to shift, the walls closing in, the air thick with an oppressive weight. She moved then, slowly, unnaturally, like her body was stiff, like it didn't quite belong to her. She sat up in the bed, her head tilting at a grotesque angle. I could hear the creak of her neck as she turned it toward me, the sound grating, like it didn't belong in this world. My breath came in short, panic gasps. And then she spoke. Her voice wasn't human. It was hollow, like it came from deep underground, like it echoed from some other place entirely. "You should never have come here," she whispered. I could feel the words in my bones, in my very soul, like they were vibrating through my entire body. The terror I felt was so raw, so overwhelming, that I could barely stand. I reached for the door, my hand shaking, but as I turned, the room began to change. It wasn't the same room anymore. The walls warped, bending and twisting as though they were made of something fluid. The bed, the figure, everything in the room shifted, moved, and I realized then, horror sinking in, that I wasn't in the same place. I had crossed over into something else. This room, this place, was never meant for the living. It was some kind of doorway. I spun around, trying to find the door, trying to escape, but there was no door anymore. The room was changing with each passing second, the floor tilting beneath me, and the air growing thick with something that pressed against my chest, squeezing the breath out of me. I ran. I don't even know how, but my legs moved before I could even think. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just running, and the shadows followed me. The whispers returned, louder this time, all around me, laughing, mocking, as if they were part of the walls themselves, part of the very building. My footsteps echoed, louder than ever, and I could feel the shadows closing in on me. I had to get out. I turned a corner, and the hallway stretched on, farther than it should have. The lights flickered and buzzed. I could hear her again, the woman's voice, faint at first, then clearer, sharper. "Leave now," she said, her voice echoing in my head, "or you'll be like me. Forever." I didn't stop. I couldn't. But the more I ran, the more the hospital seemed to stretch, to grow around me. The hallways twisted. The walls moved. The doorways disappeared. I was lost. And then, just as I thought I might collapse, I saw it. The exit. A door, finally. The exit sign hung above it, glowing red. I ran toward it, heart pounding, hands shaking. I reached for the door handle, desperate, and I felt it. A cold hand, icy and dry, grasping my wrist. I turned around, expecting to face something. But there was nothing. Nothing but the dark hallway, stretching ahead, empty. I jerked my arm away, panicked, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. My breath hitched. I turned the handle again, harder, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers were deafening now, all around me. And then I heard it. A soft laugh. A low, mocking chuckle from behind me. I spun around, my eyes wide, heart thundering in my chest. Standing there, just a few feet away, was the woman. But she wasn't the same. Her face was twisted, contorted with a horrific smile. And in her eyes, there was only darkness. I was trapped. There was no way out. I don't know how much time passed after that moment. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. The world around me had become a blur. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of light a threat. A reminder that I wasn't alone. The hallways stretched endlessly, like they were mocking me. The more I ran, the further away the exit seemed. It was as if the hospital was alive, toying with me, shifting its walls to keep me trapped. I could still feel her presence, the woman, her twisted, grinning face, her empty eyes, always just a step behind me. I could hear her voice in my head, repeating the same words over and over again. "Leave now, or you'll be like me. Forever." It echoed in the silence, so loud that I couldn't escape it, couldn't shut it out. I turned another corner, my breath ragged, my legs shaking from exhaustion, but when I reached the end of the hallway, I saw it, there, at the far end, a door. The exit! I was so close now. My heart leapt in my chest. I didn't care how long I'd been running. I didn't care if I was hallucinating or losing my mind. All I cared about was getting out. I pushed forward, every step a battle, the door getting closer with each desperate stride. But as I reached for the handle, it happened. The door was locked. I tugged at it, frantic, pulling with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. The more I yanked, the harder the door seemed to resist. Panic surged through me, and I felt my heart thud painfully in my chest. There was no way out. There had to be. I turned, looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see the hallway stretching behind me like an endless tunnel. But instead, there was only darkness. The lights above flickered again, once, twice, before they finally died, leaving me in complete blackness. I stumbled backward, my hands pressed against the door, my mind racing. The sound of my own breathing was deafening in the silence. I spun in place, searching for something, anything, to make sense of what was happening, but it was too late. The temperature dropped suddenly, so cold that I could see my breath forming in the air. It wasn't just cold now, it was freezing. It felt like ice was creeping into my bones. I could feel the presence again, that chilling weight, like something was looming just behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing. Just the empty hallway, dark and silent, stretching into nothingness. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not behind me, but in front of me. They were slow, deliberate, and they were getting closer. My eyes darted toward the sound, but I still couldn't see anyone. My heart hammered in my chest, my legs trembling with fear. I backed up, pressing myself against the door, as the footsteps grew louder, closer, but still, no one was in sight. Then, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A shadow. At first, it was a blur, just a movement in the darkness, but as my eyes focused, I saw it more clearly. A figure tall and hunched, standing at the far end of the hallway, just out of reach of the flickering light. It was watching me. I knew it was. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it was. The woman. Her face was twisted into that horrific grin again, her empty eyes locked onto mine. The figure stepped forward, its movements jerky, unnatural, like it wasn't entirely part of this world. Each step it took echoed through the hallway, and I knew it was coming for me. It wasn't just following me anymore, it was hunting me. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My hands fumbled around the door handle again, but it was no use. The door was still locked. I couldn't escape. My legs were frozen to the spot, my body paralyzed with fear. But as the figure got closer, something strange happened. The hallway began to distort again. The walls warped, bending inward as if the very structure of the hospital was bending around me. The figure in front of me, the woman, stopped in place, her eerie smile still plastered across her face. And then, for the first time since I'd entered this nightmare, she spoke. "Leave now," she said. Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but there was no mistaking the malice beneath it. "You should have left when you had the chance." I turned and ran again, desperate, but the hallway had changed again. It was no longer the hospital I knew. It was like a maze, shifting and twisting, leading me further into the darkness. The walls closed in on me, and I could hear her voice, taunting me, echoing through the twisted corridors. I ran and ran, but no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't escape. The laughter, the mocking, hollow laughter, followed me, growing louder, as if it was coming from everywhere at once. I tried to scream, tried to find my voice, but it was too late. And then, just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I found myself back at the door. The same door. The door that had been locked. But it wasn't locked anymore. I grabbed the handle, pulled it open, and without thinking, I stepped through. The moment I did, everything went silent. The world outside was cold, too cold. The night air felt strange, too still, as if the whole world had frozen in place. I turned around to look back at the door, the one that had led me out of that nightmare. But there was nothing there. No door. No hallway. Just empty, quiet streets stretching into the darkness. I was outside. I was free. But as I stood there, panting and disoriented, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The hospital, the building, was still there. I could see it in the distance, standing tall, looming over the street like a shadow. But it wasn't just the building. It was waiting. I could still hear the whispers, faint in the distance. I could still feel the cold breath on the back of my neck, like something was following me, waiting for me to come back. And then I saw it, the reflection in the window of the building. Her face, the woman's face. I turned quickly, but there was no one behind me. Just the empty street, the silence. But I knew. It wasn't over. It would never be over. As I stand here, staring at the cold, empty street before me, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me. It's like the hospital is still there, lurking in the dark, waiting for me to return, or maybe waiting for someone else. The thing is, I don't know what happened that night. Was it all in my head? Was I just overtired, stressed out from the long shifts? Maybe it was the isolation, the exhaustion, playing tricks on me. But that's not what I believe. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. The shadows, the whispers, the cold that never seemed to leave me. The way the hospital itself seemed alive, as if it was a place that held something that wasn't supposed to be there. The woman, the figure, those voices, they were real. And that's the scariest part. You can leave a place. You can walk away. But what if it doesn't leave you? What if something attaches itself to you, something you can't see, but you can always feel, following you, whispering to you in the silence? What if the terror never ends? And so, I ask you, have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever been to a place where the walls seemed to breathe, where the shadows moved, and the air was thick with something you couldn't quite name? Have you ever been in a hospital, or anywhere, that felt like it was more than just bricks and mortar? Have you ever had something unexplainable happen? Something that made you question everything you thought you knew about the world around you? If you have, I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Tell me what happened to you, because trust me, you're not alone. There are more of us out there, and as much as we may try to forget, some things, some places, never really let us go. So the next time you find yourself walking through a hospital or standing alone in a dark hallway, think about it. Think about what might be lurking just around the corner. Think about the things that are always waiting just outside the light, because not every place is as safe as it seems. And remember, sometimes the things that haunt us the most aren't the ones we can see. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't even explain.